Welcome back. Thank you everyone for being here for this session, and really excited to be talking more about data this morning. I think we got a little bit of a warm up from the last panel. But quickly, I'm Megan. I'm a manager of customer success here at Affinity, and I spend a lot of time talking to my customers about data, even some of you this morning, relationship data, CRM data, partner data, etc. But I guess, to be honest, none of you are here to listen to me talk about data, which is why we have three wonderful panelists here to talk more about data in general, how they're using it, how it's being used in the VC industry. So I guess, first off, thanks so much for being here. And quickly, I'll do quick introductions, but before that, housekeeping items. This is a 45-minute session. We do have three panelists here.
The Renesh one, yeah, the Renesh one. Oh no, he's not. He's later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we good? 45-minute session. We've already started, so and marketing runs a tight ship around here, so we probably won't have time for Q&A. That said, our panelists will be available after this conversation if you have questions for them, yeah, you can find them afterwards. So without further ado, quick introductions. We have Rachel Feely-Cole from F Prime. Rachel, you want to give a little introduction to yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Rachel Feely-Cole with F Prime.
Next mic, sorry.
Hello.
Try again.
Hi. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Rachel Feely-Cole with F Prime Capital. Across our global platforms, we have about 11 billion under management. I work for our tech team, leading our community and platform efforts, where we mostly focus on early stage investments in fintech as well as enterprise IT.
Next up, Aga Sheffer. Aga comes to us from Bain Capital Ventures. Aga, you want to tell us a little bit about your role?
Sure. I joined Bain Capital Ventures a few months ago to lead the data science efforts there. We focus on trying to identify exceptional founders and companies in our investment domains, such as infrastructure software, fintech, application commerce. Before BCV, I was a senior data scientist at StitchFX, where I was building recommendation systems for our clients. And in particular, something that maybe is interesting here, I was also building NLP models to extract structured insights from millions of feedback notes from our clients. And before that, I was working as an engineer in some startups and bigger companies here in California.
All right, welcome. Thank you. And last but not least, we have Orla Brown. Orla comes to us from one of our newest data partners, Dealroom.
Yeah, hi, I'm Orla. I lead the intelligence unit at Dealroom, which is an intelligence platform for discovering the most promising startups and startup ecosystems.
All right, well, welcome again, everyone. So let's jump into the conversation. So this first question will be for Aga and Rachel. So just to give us a little background, how are your firms using data today, and sort of what are your main goals in leveraging data?
I can quickly start. So as I mentioned in the intro, we are first and foremost trying to identify exceptional founders and companies in our investment domains. So that's how we're leveraging data mostly right now. We are also using data to bring more confidence in the investment process. So this is something that we're just starting to do, but can we provide more data and more data signals to help our investing teams with making better decisions. Our goals are to be really early in identifying founders and companies, and opening the aperture and having really full picture of what's happening in our investment domains, as well as can we bring more validation and confidence to our partners and investors. They may already have some data sources they're using, but can we provide more data signals to help them understand whether this data is actually accurate, and as well as bringing more data signals that they may normally not have access to.
Yeah, I would say that we're pretty similar, especially in regards to sourcing. I think the other thing that we're really focused on when we're trying to identify what data projects we should be doing is how can we create more efficiency in our processes, and how can we kind of create more automation and leverage data to get us, marginally faster at what we're doing. As most people in this room know, venture capital is like a game of getting to the room first. And so we're trying to make sure that we're providing our investment team with the opportunity to engage and find signals of that they would be doing manually and leveraging big data. And we're also using it to try and understand our network better, with a large emphasis on what are we doing in terms of understanding our network, and how can we then leverage outside data resources to then making sure that we're connecting the right people, surfacing talent opportunities and customer introductions as fast as possible.
All right, and Orla, slightly different take on this question. So for your VC customers, typically, how do you see them leveraging your data sets?
In a similar way to the way that these ladies have described that they do internally, I suppose. So our clients use Dealroom to discover startups, to find companies that aren't on their radar yet, and also for due diligence to an extent as well. I think that there's a couple of trends from the last couple of years that have made this kind of data even more crucial, I would say, is that firstly, we're seeing a big trend of kind of people investing earlier and earlier. So whether that's like growth stage investors looking earlier, but even from Series A, maybe looking at seed, or seed looking at pre-seed. And that means that you kind of want to cast your net a little bit wider as well, try and discover companies that aren't necessarily within your current network. Even find companies before they're companies, looking for university spin-outs when it's just a couple of researchers on a university campus. And so, yeah, data can help you source those companies. And equally, I would say the other trend is kind of that investing has become more international as well, and that's certainly been an acceleration through COVID, where people, if they were working from home, then having a meeting with somebody on Zoom, it doesn't really matter whether they're down the road or in a different time zone. And I think some of that's become a bit stickier, that people want to use these tools to discover companies that aren't in their backyard, that aren't within their immediate network of people in their own city. And also there are really exciting startup ecosystems that are popping up all over the world. And I think that a tool like ours is used by our clients to find those companies that aren't on their radar.
All right, thanks. So one of the things that came up in preparing for this panel was this concept of a spectrum of, completely gut-driven investing styles and completely data-driven investing styles. And probably most people want to be somewhere along that spectrum, but curious for Rachel and Aga, where would you say that your firms are today, and where do you want to be?
I would say that both are very valuable. And what we would like to do at BCV is actually to marry both. We would like to leverage both the expertise and experience of our investors in these domains that I listed before, and data. And where we are at right now, I would say it's still pretty early in terms of the data-driven investing. This is still a pretty young initiative within BCV, but it's a really exciting time to be in, especially considering what's happening in the economy right now. I think marrying a more mature data investing platform with expertise of our team is going to have great outcomes.
Yeah, everything we do with data is trying to replicate kind of the thought process and actions that our investors would be doing manually. So I would say that no matter what, we always want it to have that intersection of creating operational excellence with white glove service. So, as we think about platform and how we're expanding it, if we are able to develop a top talent list of different CFOs, we're never going to just send that blindly and just lean on the data. We're always going to make sure that there's a last manual check. So I would say that we're just trying to really focus more on marginal improvements across our entire investment operation platform, rather than, becoming solely data driven overall.
And Orla, on your side, how would you say that sort of what they're saying compares to trends you're seeing in the industry?
I mean, I think I completely agree. I think that we're seeing a lot more people interested in data and alternative data sets to help them with their sourcing. But I don't think that it's it's at the expense of the kind of relationship side either, because networks are so important. And just if you're going to be working with these people for a number of years, so you're going to need to build a relationship with them as well as just understand the numbers, I suppose. So, I mean, we obviously recently partnered with Affinity. I think it's a really nice like example of how we see the industry as well, as that it's a combination of the quant side and the relationship. And yeah, I think we're just going to be seeing more of that.
All right. And so back to Aga and Rachel, in terms of sort of where that decision for data and what data is being brought into your firms, where does that decision sit?
Well, we like to think of ourselves as a flat organization, and so it's a group decision. I will say, though, that we have a data scientist on the team. He does a lot of the diligence. We always are open to the rest of the team of getting ideas and investors and things like that, saying, hey, I saw this great data source. Can we try and get some of these signalings into our systematic sourcing efforts? So I think because we're trying to build more of like a machine, it's not a singular decision making. But it would, like everything in a venture firm ends at the partnership level.
I would say that in order to make this decision, there are like two factors that are important to take into account. Like the data needs to be relevant to the investment decision or the domain that we are in, and it needs to be like accurate and trustworthy. So in terms of like finding like relevant data signals, maybe similar to what Rachel said, like we also are like collaborating really closely. The fund is pretty small, and we're like talking regularly about like what kind of data will be relevant, and it has to be relevant to this domain. So for instance, for like B2B software, the data that we would look for will be very different than for like early stage infrastructure software. So the investors may come with some ideas what data may be used, and then the data science or data team comes in to actually look for different sources of data that could support this. And to the point of like looking for accurate data, that's of course on the data side. The data scientists decide and investigate how accurate this data is, what is the coverage, is it going to be trustworthy enough and important in this process.
So with that, with both of you, I mean, it sounds like it's more of it's a partnership. There's the machine that you're building. And so a couple of questions come up out of that. One is, how do you build trust that the data is accurate with the investment team? And the other piece is that feedback loop. So is this data that is relevant and helpful? So how do you sort of approach those two things?
I think like the part that we are making the decision together, right? Or like we're talking about what data may be used. So this is already like we are all participating in this process. So that's why like there is more trust, and we're all trying to be, we're honest, and we are definitely looking for feedback. We are now introducing better ways of collecting this feedback on the data signals and whatever we're surfacing to the team through Affinity, actually. So that's something that our head of product here, Paulina, is spearheading really strongly. And we're still early days here in collecting this feedback, but it's going to be like super important for us to do. And I think like Affinity is going to be a great tool for collecting that data.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that it's also like, is it working or not, right? Like, so when we built our systematic sourcing efforts, we're constantly saying like, is the machine beating our investors to the punch? Are we able to surface more deals? Are we able to close deals faster because of that? And so a lot of it at the end of the day is like results driven. It's not kind of done in silo. It's very much, we're all in the Monday meetings. We're all part of like the investment decision-making process, et cetera. And so we know what people are doing, and we know if it's working or not, because they also know what we're working on as well.
All right. And Aga, just sort of going a layer deeper here, and this was something that was brought up in the last panel, which is that there's a lot of noise when it comes to data in the industry. So how do you parse through, or how do you think about that process of parsing through what is noise and what are those signals that you are looking for, or I guess what data is most valuable?
That's a great question. And I think there are two aspects here. So one is like new data sources or new data signals. How do you like decide on like the new data that you're going to introduce to the system? And then like maybe you already know what data you're considering, maybe there are multiple sources of that, how do you actually decide which one is best? For the first one, again, we talk a lot with our investors. We try to understand what data may be relevant for them in this process. So that's one way of doing that. We also want to introduce data sets and data sources that investors normally wouldn't be using or wouldn't have easy access to because it's just not feasible for them on a daily basis. So for instance, one example that's Kevin mentioned in the previous panels, maybe using GitHub, right? If we're looking for early stage infrastructure software companies or founders, this could be one source. And this is something that may not be really feasible for investors to keep checking over and over again. Another factor could be how can we bring more advantage to our fund? What are some data sources that maybe other funds are not using? So what is that? So these are these three aspects for new data. For data that we already are kind of exploring and may want to pick the best source, we definitely are looking for coverage. Do we have a good representative sample of data about the companies in our domains? We're looking for accuracy. Is this data actually accurate? Can we cross-check it with some other sources? And is it timely, right? So to Rachel's point, it's really important for us to get this data at a regular cadence, frequently and as early as possible.
Just a quick follow-up question on coverage. So what's most important to you? Is it more about the domains that you're investing in? Is it more about geography? Where do you find the most challenge?
I'm not sure what is more, I think maybe, yeah, what is most challenging. Okay, so we are definitely more hypothesis driven, and we define areas of investment domains that we're really focused on. So definitely we want to have coverage within infrastructure software, application software, fintech, etc. We also know that we're looking for companies within the US, and in terms of telling whether a company is based in the US versus in the UK is not that difficult, but being able to tell whether an early stage company is doing something in fintech that is maybe not consumer facing, that may be a little bit more difficult.
Okay, thanks. And Rachel, any other thoughts on sort of the signal versus noise question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, a lot of it is just trying to figure out how we can leverage what our investment team is doing. And so for us, it's very much more what are you doing now manually, and how can we automate that to the best of our ability? So we spend a lot of time making sure that we're trying to integrate the best data sources into our process and really focus on more the infrastructure where we are in our data journey right now. So then that way we're able to process things as quickly as possible, educate the algorithm, so then that way we're able to then make sure that we're moving faster, so it can kind of, especially in regards to sourcing, then be able to have stronger outputs for us at the end of the day. So I think we're always willing to experiment with what we're trying to do, and we try and leverage whoever it is on the investment team that says, hey, we should be doing this. It's okay, that means you're doing it with us, and then work with them to figure out what are the best next steps and making sure it's actually qualified.
Okay, thanks. And Orla, on your side, so how does this decision-making process look like sort of internally, but also what are you seeing in the industry from your customers?
So we work really closely with our customers to figure out what kind of data we want to add and what we want to focus on. And so we really try and take their lead and try and solve some of their problems. So, I mean, one of the things I mentioned was university spin-outs. That's something we've been focusing on tracking recently. Equally, patent data, which is going to be on the this sprint. It's going to be added to the platform. But that was a request that we had from some of our clients as well. And equally, there's diversity data. People increasingly interested in, wanting to have diverse portfolios in terms of the founders that they're backing. That's a really interesting challenge. Impact investing. So we kind of map startups against the different UN Sustainable Development Goals, for example, in case you want to factor that in as well. But to the points that Aga was saying, it's not just about getting this data, but making it meaningful and relevant, timely. And so a lot of work goes into that as well. In the way that we build out our taxonomy is super important, because it's all well and good having a load of companies in a database, but actually if you're only interested in space utilities or in digital therapeutics, then having a really nuanced, relevant taxonomy developed is something that we spend a lot of time on as well. And work with some of our partners on to make sure that it's constantly evolving, constantly up to date.
Okay, this might be too in the weeds, but can you tell us a little bit more about that taxonomy? It's something that does come up from time to time, because once you get into that space of, okay, here are all the different domains that we're investing in, it's something that I've talked to with a lot of our customers before.
Yeah, so we basically develop it ourselves, but we work with our partners to do it. So the intelligence unit, so my team is a team of analysts who are kind of specialized in different verticals. We create a lot of research, on which we partner with people who are leading in the space. And through that research, we figure out what are the niches, what are the new areas that we need to start tracking or classifying, what are the emerging trends that we need to focus on a bit. So an example is, we recently developed a space taxonomy with the European Space Agency, for example. We're doing some research with them. We built out our InsurTech taxonomy with Mundi Ventures in InsurTech VC. Our health tech taxonomy, we worked on research with INCEF and MTIP, so early to kind of Series B stage specific health tech investors. But these are constantly under review to make sure that we're kind of tracking the latest trends. Is that detailed enough, or too detailed?
That's good. Thank you. So going back to and switching back to Aga and Rachel. So we've talked about sort of the machine, but how do you decide where this data then lives and where it goes, especially when you get to that stage where you want it to be sort of in front of and presented to the investors?
So the way that we really think about and approach all this is we don't want to ask people to change their workflow. We always go to where the people are, and we try and minimize what types of products we're actually introducing to our investment team. So anything involving sourcing or people always lives within Affinity, and that's like the interface. I will say though that we leverage back end different programs and proprietary applications that we built that then feeds back into Affinities, but that's still like the user interface overall. We also have created a lot through Affinities API Slack reminders. And so just constantly pinging people, because that's where we do majority of our team communication overall. So I think that, from an interface place and how we want people to engage with the data, it's pretty simple that it's always going to be Affinity, because we don't want people to not be entering deals into Affinity, making commentary on, the people within our network, portfolio companies, et cetera, and keep it kind of streamlined in that way. But we do leverage lots of things in the back end. But no one sees it. It's like an iceberg. Yeah.
I think, we can be collecting a lot of data and doing some fancy machine learning, like industry classification, taxonomy, entity resolution, all of that in the back end. But if this data is not surfaced and used by our downstream users that are investors and in the future portfolio companies or platform, then this data is basically useless. This whole work is just, you can throw it away. How we are trying to make sure that it is actually used. That's something that, again, we're actively working on, and Ampli, I can tell you a little bit more about is improving the whole workflow of our investment team, making sure that they can provide feedback, that they can leverage the data that we are servicing through Affinity from the data-driven investing team. Behind the scenes, of course, a lot of data lives, maybe not buried, but it is in Snowflake lake and the data lake, and we're working towards creating more cleaner data schemas, some kind of like entity resolution to make sure that all of this data that we identify and use can be easily joined and linked and then surfaced back in Affinity about like companies or founders that we are currently reaching out to or we already have a relationship with.
All right, that was a bit of a selfish question, so getting it back to Affinity. All right, so Rachel, one of the things that we've talked about, so originally the title of this panel was data-driven sourcing, but wanted Rachel to be on this panel specifically because in your role, this goes beyond just sourcing. It's also about portfolio companies and data to help and provide more value to the portfolio companies. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're using data in that realm?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the big things that have been a focus for this last quarter and going to be like the main theme of 23 for our data projects is people. And so we're really working to understand what our overall firm-wide relationships look like and how are we able to kind of leverage Affinity's connection score and things like that to know who are we connected with so that if Joe working for X company has a question, we can still make sure that the entirety of the firm's network is being able to be leveraged. So a lot of that is making sure that we have appropriate taxonomy, making sure that we have seniority level, skill level. We're very thematic investors, so we always want to make sure that our recommendations from our network also reflect that as well. So a lot of it is just kind of untangling and kind of combining multiple data sources to kind of provide that more clean interface so that we can quickly surface faster introductions, which is one of our main goals of our platform team overall.
So I heard you mentioned connection strength, but what other types of data are you finding value in on the people side?
A lot of it is so one, it's again, the number one thing is like who actually is in our network. And I think that's where that connection score, even though you don't want more details about that, but that connection score is really valuable to us. We're trying to understand what type of companies people are working for and kind of are we able to make those introductions for talent or customers, because I think that the type of company they work for, whether it's more of an incumbent or a high growth company, will leverage where we want them to fall. Although it works for some people, we don't want someone who's been an MD at a bank for 20 years to be a recommendation for a VP of finance at a B stage company. So trying to understand where kind of those different lines are and knowing the industry that they work in is really high priority for us. So that way we can just say, hey, we're looking for somebody that has R&D experience within the pharma space, and we want them as a potential board member. That means they need to have at least 15 years of experience. They need to understand this industry, and they're really struggling right now in marketing. So we really want that perspective on the board for the independent board member. Who do we know in our network overall? So just untangling that and figuring out what are the questions that whether it be in our Monday meeting or just a one-off conversation, being like, hey Megan, do you know anybody that fits this profile? How can we can just say, put it into the system, put it into our algorithm, be able to surface who those individuals are, and then say, hey, Megan, I know you know Bob over there. Can you make an introduction? Anything we can do to help make sure that we're accelerating the process and allow people to be proactive rather than being dependent on people being reactive to their questions, because everyone's really busy. Times are always going to be the most valuable resource, and we're just trying to create as most efficient process as possible for everybody so we can help our portfolios, number one.
All right, thank you. So taking a step back, and this question is for everyone, the last year has seen a lot of change economically. So how are you seeing your data strategy shift over the past year? And then how do you see that continuing to shift into 2023?
I can start. I mentioned that our data-driven investing program is still pretty young, so I don't really see huge shifts because it is just early days for us. But I would say that I feel pretty lucky to join a fund where our partners and investors were very rational over this whole period recently, and where I believe we are heading. I think people and our teams would definitely use data more, right? So again, like one of our goals is to bring more confidence to their investment process. So can we surface more data such that they can verify their data sources better? Can we surface data from other data sources that they may not be like considering? Can we surface data at scale such that we reduce bias and noise? So again, this is an exciting time for data teams, and hopefully that will help with more data-driven, more rational decisions over time.
Yeah, I would agree. I think in times of uncertainty, then data becomes even more valuable and more crucial, whether that's relationship data or quant. So I think we're already seeing a bit more interest as a result of that.
All right, Rachel, anything?
I would just say that, I think that overall, like we try and be patient capital as much as possible. And so for us, like, I don't think there has been a significant shift in our strategy in regards to data with the current market indicators. We've always been really data driven in terms of our diligence process. We are not necessarily those types of investors that will meet somebody at lunch and then give them a term sheet an hour later. Like, we like to go through the process and make sure that we understand the company. So I don't think there has been a significant shift.
All right. Thank you. And so actually, this is our last question here. So data, part of this is data is often an attempt to reduce human bias in the decision-making process. So is that something, especially Aga and Rachel, is that something that you've seen brought to bear? And are there areas where it's potentially creating new blind spots?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, right? Like the more data you bring in, the less bias, the less noise there should be, etc. And I would like to be maybe optimistic and say like, yes, I've seen many cases where this actually works. But something that like really like blows my mind or like kind of like hurts is like if you look at the data last year, out of all the like venture capital in the U.S. Available, only 2% was captured by female founders, for instance. Right, so like in general, we're like moving towards being more data driven, but we're definitely not like where we should be yet. So again, like a long way to go. I'm excited, and I believe that data will actually help with reducing the bias. And in terms of blind spots, is also a really good question. Especially in our space, like we have to make sure that we look at the data, but we also like understand where this data is coming from and are we covering all the bases. So for instance, like if we were to maybe use this conference as one of the sources of exceptional founders or people to connect to, like are we actually like covering all our bases? Is this like if we were just to use this list of attendees of the conference as our source, like definitely really high quality attendees, but like is this like sufficient? Another interesting example I think is like in ML, you have to really understand how the data, what data was used to train a particular model to make predictions. So for instance, like the GPT-3 model, the large language model was trained before pandemic happened, and now if you ask GPT-3 to tell you something about the pandemic and explain something about it, like it has no idea what the heck happened like in the past 2 years. So this is a huge blind spot, like definitely amazing technology and all of that, but like if the data sources are missing, then like definitely you're going to end up with a much worse outcome that you could have otherwise.
Yeah, I think that for us, we're really focusing on leveraging data to help surface opportunities rather than actually help us make those decisions. But with that being said, we are trying to leverage data to, one, make sure that we are diversifying our pipeline overall, which I think always helps at the end of the day. And we do spend a lot of time looking at our investment data that we collect via Affinity and making sure like what are we putting through the pipeline, what are we elevating, what do the founders look like to help us understand that. So I think that one way that we use data a lot that we haven't talked as much about here is to making sure anytime we do a retrospective, it's always a data-driven conversation. We're always looking at what we have, looking through our pipeline in Affinity, seeing who we are looking at, who are we not looking at, and asking honest questions like, hey, why did we pass on this? And making sure that we're just shining light on the problem rather than just making the assumption that we don't have biases.
Yeah, and a friend of Dealroom's, Sarah Gamuri from Atomico, she said at one of our events once that data is the ally of the underdog. And I thought that was a really nice line. I think that, you know, I mentioned diversity data and impact data earlier. There's certainly a lot more interest in that. It kind of comes up in more and more conversations that we have, which I think is a nice sign. But equally, yeah, we haven't seen that much movement on some of these metrics. And so it's important to keep looking into your blind spots and trying to fill them out, whether that's, you know, it's easier to find companies that are in established tech hubs, for example. We recently launched Dealroom Signal, which is a kind of predictive algorithm that looks at things like team traction, timing for startups. And one of the really interesting things to me was that some of the companies that were coming out on top were like a fast-growing bootstrapped enterprise software company in Hungary, or a fintech in West Africa, or a neuromorphic chip company in Finland. And they're just, yeah, not necessarily in the places or built by the people that you might have expected. So I think that, yeah, data hopefully can be the ally of the underdog, but we need to try hard at it as well.
All right. Well, on that note, I think that's a good note to wrap up on. So thank you, Aga, Rachel, Orla, for your time today. Just quickly, if you have questions for them, feel free to find them after the panel. And if you have questions about how to do any of this in Affinity, you can find me, you can find them, of course, and their experience, and other customer success folks in the room. Raise your hand. I see Ari and Steve over there. You can talk to them as well. But again, thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference.